Welcome to Defining Dad Bod, where we work to untangle the messy knots of the health and fitness industry as if your children's lives depended on it. Because they do. This is where we decide to make our bodies stand for something bigger than ourselves. This is where we find practical wisdom to live by, one powerful conversation at a time. May the words spoken here inspire you to keep moving forward no matter where you are. Who knows who you could be if you could become 1% better every single day.
We can do the show thanks to the support of listeners just like you. For more information how you can become part of the inner circle, go to findingdadbod.com/inner circle.
What's up, guys? This is Alex Van Houten with Defining Dad Bod. I hope you're doing super well. It is a beautiful day here in Arkansas, super sunny, and today is a wonderful day for me to bring you this conversation with our favorite naturopath, Dr. Bruce Cooper. And today we're going to be having an extremely important conversation about your microbiome. Now, chances are, unless you've been living in a cave for the past 3 to 4 weeks, you've gotten a crazy crash course in microbiology with regard to trying to prevent the spread of a virus through your family and community. And while Bruce and I talk through that just a little bit, the bulk of our conversation today centers around creating a positive and powerful environment in and on your body that might be the key to helping you digest your food better, increase your energy levels, decrease your body fat, improve your immunity, and even protect yourself against bouts of depression and anxiety. I recently had Cynthia Thurlow on to talk about intermittent fasting. That's episode 139 if you haven't checked it out. But in the intro to that conversation, I said that fasting is something that requires several episodes to unpack well, and that Miss Thurlow's conversation and mine was a great springboard into that series. The same could be said of this conversation. I have plans in the future to expand this conversation into a series that fleshes out how you can best make use of the new science we're understanding about the microbiome. But if you stay tuned for this conversation, I know it's going to be infinitely valuable to you, as Bruce and I focus on many practical things that you can start doing today to improve your microbiome. I'm excited for this conversation, and I hope you are too. One thing I want to invite you to before we get started: if you're not already a part of the inner circle of Defining Dad Bod, right now is a fantastic time to join. At the time of this recording, we are halfway through our Faithful 40 challenge, and it's been powerful. Every day, members of our community are publicly posting their mindset for the day, their exercise plan for the day, and their nutrition journal from yesterday. And the way that everybody's been supporting each other, encouraging each other, and relying on the community for inspiration and support has simply been amazing. In a time where it's really difficult to control things in our lives, the people in the Faithful 40 challenge have doubled down on controlling the things they can control. It's free to be a part of the inner circle. It's free to join the Faithful 40 challenge. And if you dive in right now, you're going to be joining us at the halfway mark. But I would say 20 days of consistency and support is better than no days. But of course I would say that. I'm a coach, and I'm pretty biased about that sort of thing. But if you want to dive in and see what it's all about, go to definingdadbod.com/inner circle. It takes 2 minutes to join the group, and then you can explore the posts that I'm talking about. And even drop a comment in the group if you'd like me to start tagging you in the Faithful 40 challenge posts. Like I said, we'd be happy to have you jump in and be a part of it now, rather than sit on the sidelines and wait for the next one. And yes, there will be a next one. This has been valuable, and it's already been requested several times. Again, that's the Faithful 40 challenge in definingdadbod.com/inner circle. Thanks so much for tuning in to Defining Dad Bod. I hope you and yours stay safe, find productive ways to use this time, and make your health and fitness a priority, so that you can come out of this thing stronger than when you started. Go to definingdadbod.com/inner circle. And so without further ado, let's talk to Dr. Bruce Cooper about your microbiome. What's up, guys? This is Alex Van Houten with Defining Dad Bod. I hope you're doing super well. We are joined again with one of my best buddies in the whole wide world, my favorite naturopath, Bruce Cooper. How are you today, brother?
I am doing fantastic, Alex. It's so great to be here with you again.
I'm really glad to have this conversation. We are going to be diving into the microbiome today. And we were talking pre-show about this. There's so much that can be said about the microbiome. So I'm hoping to pack in just a really powerful amount of information and value in our conversation today. But I would be remiss if I didn't reference the pandemic we're going through with regard to why this is relevant for listeners to keep listening. Because at this moment, if you don't say COVID-19 in the middle of your sentence, then they're like, all right, this can wait until after we're all not on lockdown. So I just wanted to say that I'm excited about this conversation specifically because given what we're all going through right now, politics aside, stimulus packages aside, shelter in places aside, I think now more than ever, and maybe this is me with rosy goggles on, I think now more than ever, people are going to be extremely motivated to take control of their controllables and to do things that will make them more resilient in the long run, whether you have pre-existing conditions, diabetes, obesity, cardiometabolic disease, or if you're an otherwise healthy individual, you're going to be working really hard over the next few months. In addition to the many other things you could be working on, you're going to be working very hard to make the best of you. And I think this conversation we're going to have today about the microbiome is going to be such a helpful thing for people to know about. Before we get into microbiome itself, what do you think about that, Bruce? How does this feel in your naturopathic practice about just the overwhelming amount of information and focus and kind of fear that's revolving around health and fitness right now?
Well, like you said, it's unprecedented what's going on right now. I'm watching a lot of mixed messages out in, again, all politics aside, but there's want to balance the economy with wanting to protect the people. There is a lot of information going on out there. There's a lot of misinformation. You like myself have had, my degree is in human biology. We were both pre-med, so we took some of the same microbiology, cellular, molecular biology, courses, biochemistry. And so there's a little bit more understanding of some of the things. I got to study this, 30 years ago. But when I hear the epidemiologists speak, heads of the medical community speak, I understand what they're trying to do. And there's a big push to lessen the burden on the healthcare community, on all the logistics. You see they're having shortages in personal protective gear now. And that's, part of the problem. But we also need to know that flattening the curve doesn't necessarily speak to, hey, not everybody is going to get this. It's out there. The numbers are growing. And one of the big things, we shouldn't be afraid of it to the point that we're having these runs on toilet paper, which I think a lot of people have found very odd, but we should have enough caution to protect, the people that are more sensitive to what happens, our elders. That's the population that seems to have the higher death rate and mortality rates that are going on. But we need to know that a lot of us are going to get it as they perfect the testing. As that gets better, those numbers are going to skyrocket because we can identify it. So it shouldn't lead to the panic. Practice social distance, that's basically 2 arm lengths is 6 foot, thinking that your arm is approximately 3 feet, give or take a little bit, and then the next person. So, practice that social distance. Washing hands is always important. Covering, your nose and mouth when you're sneezing, wearing PPEs where necessary. That all would help, but we can't have a fear to where we're destroying our population at this point.
I hear that, man. And I'm excited today to talk about the microbiome specifically, because if people have been watching the news or, unless you've been living under a rock, the words microbiology have it's a negative connotation. We might have viruses on our hands, like wash them to death. There might be viruses on my grocery bag. I need to spray Lysol on them. But today we're going to be talking about the positive side of microbiology. And this is the fact that coronavirus notwithstanding, or influenza notwithstanding, you actually have all kinds of bugs crawling all over you right now. In the form of
including
viruses, and they're inside of you in your intestinal tract and stuff. And if you're listening to this and you have a predisposition toward obsessive compulsive disorder, you might want to just shut this one off right now. I'm just telling you, because we're going to be talking about the microbiome today. What is it? What it does for us? How we take good care of it? How it can make us a stronger, more resilient, less stressed, more powerful human being, and might even play into us looking good over the summer, even if we have to social distance at the the pools. But the point is, we've got a good conversation around the microbiome today. And I hope that with everybody's mindset on the tiny bugs that might cause us problems, we can be talking about some of the tiny bugs that are helping us out. So all that being said, Bruce, when you speak with your clients and patients and you're trying to help them understand the microbiome, we'll start with a very simple question. It's not simple to understand sometimes, but a simple question, which is, what the heck is the microbiome? What is that? And then we'll start talking about what effects it might have on us.
So the microbiome is the makeup of the bacteria, the fungus, the viruses, the parasites that are living in and on us. Most of us think about our intestines, small and large intestine, and the amount of bugs that are living there. It starts orally. There's bacteria that live and goes through our esophagus. There's stuff living in our stomach, then through our intestines and out. But we also have to know that our microbiome is on our skin. There are, and this is where, my wife being a holistic esthetician, this is her area of expertise, and it's a different community of bacteria and other bugs that live on our skin. But I mean, they have found inside of breast tissue, they have found species of bacteria that actually, the absence of certain bacteria in breast tissue, the women that have that have a higher rate of breast cancer. So there's actually a benefit for having our microbiome intact and protecting us. So
yeah, and a lot of people, maybe if you, it's been a while since you've taken biology. The first life forms that we know of on Earth were single cellular organisms. Those were prokaryotes, and eventually they became eukaryotes over a vast stretch of time before we were even around. And just because we're here doesn't mean they've gone anywhere. Right. And we're currently as a society wrestling with, the new kid on the block right now, coronavirus, but they've been around for a long time. And when people think of themselves, a lot of times they think of their body as just them as a person. But at the microscopic level, there are just as many cells that are on and inside of us that aren't us.
More.
Exactly. And the first estimation was somewhere around 10 times more cells. And if I'm understanding this correctly, they've walked it back a little bit to be, 2 to 3 times more cells that are not us than are us. But I think this is extremely important. A lot of people don't understand that we exist in a synergistic, sometimes dysbiosis. That's the term for when things aren't going well for both life forms. But we exist in the synergistic relationship between our bodies and the bacteria bacteria, viruses, funguses that live on and inside of us. And just a quick story about why I started to care about this at all. And I'm sure you could echo this. It was about a decade ago. As a personal trainer, I was working with people and I came across a study. It freaking messed with my head, okay? It changed everything I thought I knew about training. It's that tiny little inception idea, if you like Inception, that's the little thing that changes everything. It was a study they did on rats. And they took rats that were in a cage and they fed them an isocaloric diet, meaning they took a group of rats, they fed them the same amount of calories as another group of rats, and everything's hunky-dory and they're living their little rat lives, right? Well, they took one group of rats and they took the fecal matter, the actual poop hanging out in the large intestine of a group of obese rats. So rats that had been overfed, that had been given, enough, what are they giving rats nowadays to fatten them up? I forgot. It's that awesome preservative. Anyway. MSG, there you go. You have to feed rats MSG in order to get them to overeat enough to make them fat, right? So they overfeed these rats, they make them fat, and then they take the poop from those rats and they put them in our happy little isocaloric rat army. And what they found was, without changing the calories at all, versus the control group, those rats got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And they were able to show that the microbiome difference in the obese rat group was the only controllable cause of the obesity in these rats. In other words, I probably used way too many words to describe it. In other words, as a personal trainer, I was reading, hey, you could feed somebody the same amount of calories as you would feed another person, and they could still get fat if they have the fat rat microbiome. That's not good. And it ruined me for months, man. It ruined me for months because it was the first time I had ever considered that there was a much larger picture of what affects somebody's body composition outside of just how much they were eating. And, I'm here today and I have a lot of hours of content railing on this concept itself. But for you, I'm sure you heard of that study.
Yeah. Yeah.
What was the thing that showed you that this was extremely important?
So even to the study you're mentioning, which I mean, as we fitness professionals, personal trainers way back when, the whole world was to weight loss is the calories in, calories out, right? And that kind of just puts a wrench right in the middle of it. If you change the microbiome in mice, and now they're looking and starting to do studies, into humans and bacterioid, and the lower amount of that type of bacteria, that species of bacteria, they're showing decrease in that and correlations, not necessarily cause and effect yet, but correlations with obese people. When they did that with mice, it does, because the bacteria are going to influence breakdown of your macronutrients. So you're, breaking down of proteins and fats and carbohydrates, and then they influence micronutrients and can actually make some, and they actually can help produce some amino acids, or get us the essential amino acids like glycine, for example, to help with that. So there's other influences, but if the bacteria that are not breaking down certain foods aren't there, you're going to have a reduced calorie count from when it entered your mouth to when it's actually being absorbed in your system. And then they're also showing, certain species that alter our hunger sensations, which is also tied into hormones in our body. So that for me was huge. Back to your point, and this was big for me when I heard these things. The bacteria, it could be a precursor to something that is important in my practice. If you remember, I'm very much on, cellular health, and the organelles, the mitochondria, and the endoplasmic reticulum are very important in what I do to work with my clients. But, they're saying that the mitochondria has been derived from, the bacteria. And there's a lot of thoughts behind that going on, but there's, several trillion cells in our body. And then the impactful thing is several trillion more, if not more, of bacteria that are there. But then even at the gene level, we have approximately 20,000 genes, in humans. And I heard this from, if you've read anything with Dr. Zach Bush, who has a lot of information on the microbiome and has done a lot of work in the area. But 10,000 genes in a fruit fly, we're only twice as better than a fruit fly. But if you look at that same example, there were 30,000 genes in a flea. So we're only 2/3 as good as a flea. But then you look at bacteria, and there's over 2 million genes in bacteria. So if that shows the importance that these single cellular organisms are to help us, that really, impacted me, just looking at that how grandiose that is.
And what you're talking about is just an amazing differentiation between how our bacteria, I'll say bacteria, microbiome, I'm using them synonymously, they're not synonymous, but how our microbiome is possibly influencing us in ways that we don't currently understand, right? And I'd like to just speak with you about the ways that I know of. I know you probably know several other ways that I don't even know about, because right now, at least as far as I can tell, this is a budding science in humans. We are just at as I understand it, we're just at the tip of the iceberg, understanding how deeply that 2 million plus genes in bacteria can actually speak to and influence the genes in our body and what we're actually proliferating. So 2 examples that I've heard about, and I'd love to hear some from you, that were just really surprising to me. One was the connection we've found between microbiome diversification, meaning what kind of bacteria make up your microbiome, and circadian rhythm. If you're a night owl versus a morning person, there's actually a fundamental difference between some of the bacterial species that make up your microbiome. And that's something that they're starting to find in robust research between people. Again, this is correlation, not causation. We didn't take quote unquote night owl bacteria and stick it in morning people to see if it makes it really hard for them to stop hitting the snooze button. But what we're starting to find is that there's actually a difference, and there seems to be a mechanism by which the bacteria in our body is communicating with the structures in our brain that control that very deep process that wakes us up in the morning, or causes us to go to bed when the sun goes down, right? And then another one that I found recently that I thought was really powerful was the effect of multivitamins on children with ADHD, and how the microbiome, this was actually something that they studied. It was just like a side effect. They're like, all right, let's take a sample. Let's take a stool sample and see what kind of bacteria are there, just to see if there was a difference. And what they found was children treated for ADHD who were also given a multivitamin were less likely 2 years later to have the same symptoms, and their microbiome shifted compared to the control group who was not given a multivitamin. And so the researchers were like, what if some of the issues with ADHD could be mitigated by microbiome therapy? And that's a powerful question. This was just like 3 months ago that this study came out, right? So anyway, those are some really surprising things that I'm starting to find that were just becoming published in our world. What are some of the things that you're finding?
One of the big ones that, again, this was a huge shift and change in how I saw the microbiome. You know, when I was a wee lad, I thought, okay, it's only in our gut and there. The big one was when they put together the correlations with the microbiome in breast tissue. It's a Sphigomonas species that is very dominant in breast tissue. And they noticed that when that species was depleted, whether it's because when we want to have surgery and they change that, or antibiotic use, or foods we eat, or, you know, we can get into that, you know, in a little bit of how that influences it. A Methylobacterium species would try to take its place, but they noticed that the more sterile, if you will, that breast tissue was, the faster cancers grew. Mm. And for me, that was really impactful, that they're starting to show correlations with what is a pretty large health issue, I think, in our society today. You know, breast cancer in women, a lot of publicity. We have a month dedicated to it. I mean, it's really big stuff. And then for them to start showing correlations that our microbiome may have in the prevention, or maybe even the lack thereof in the cause of some of that, I think that's huge. Just how fast the microbiome changes. They did a case study. They followed an infant for 2.5 years, and they showed diversity over time. And it really we can back up to, our microbiome we start getting that from our mother, through birth. And there are differences on whether it's a vaginal birth or a C-section. And then, when they start drinking breast milk, you're going to get even more diverse species in there. They showed, like, it was at day 92, child had a fever, and the microbiome shifted at that point. Day 134, the infant started eating, a rice cereal, and the microbiome shifted again. 161, starting to have formula and table foods, shifts again. And then at day 371, with antibiotic use and treatment, and then starting more on the adult diet, they showed another shift. So our microbiome, it's very dynamic. It's constantly changing based on the foods we eat, medicines we take, illnesses we might have. So seeing all of those things really just started to show me the importance of what these tiny little one-cell creatures that we really can't see unless we use a microscope are to our health and well-being and our longevity.
So well said. I was fascinated, and this is Defining Dad Bod. We have about half our listeners are men and half are women, despite the name. One of the things that just plowed this into me even more deeply was when I was doing research and reading on breastfeeding when our first son was born, and how the amazing mixture of sugars in breast milk, and there's a bunch of different sugars, galactose, and you're just not going to find them on any store-bought shelf anywhere. It's just an amazing mixture of things, and how those sugars make their way all the way through the infant to feed different sorts of bacteria, and how important that is, and how that sugar mixture is different among mammals. Like, there's different bacterial colonies supported in a cow, for instance, compared to bacterial colonies supported in a human. And you could take that throughout the primate world. But it was just fascinating to me to see that. And then also the interchange between not only the difference between vaginal delivery, a lot of people don't realize that your microbiome begins when you're born. You're sterile in the amniotic sac, and then all of a sudden you're exposed to the wide world of bacteria. And similarly, that continues with breastfeeding, that the infant's exposed to bacteria from the mother there. And that process of adding bacteria to your system and feeding certain bacterias and certain bacterias being responsive to certain stressors in your life, all those things, that process continues. I mean, it's happening right now. You and I don't know, maybe the voice of Bruce Cooper just really supports a certain type of bacteria that makes us all healthier, which means you could bottle that voice and market it, dude. I'm just kidding. Maybe someday we'll find out, right? But anyway, that being said, it blew me away. It blew me away to think my wife right now with my children in how they're being raised and how we feed them and all those things is affecting them in a way that will stay with them for the rest of their lives. To the extent that that happens, we're not sure, but we know that things like insulin resistance, circadian rhythm, as I mentioned, things like ADHD, there might be very significant links to our microbiome there. Now, I guess I have to ask, Bruce, are we screwed if by age 3 we didn't have the perfect microbiome? Now we're 30 and I'm just like 50 and we're just the products of all these bacteria talking to our brains right now. Can we affect our microbiome now intelligently?
Absolutely. So our environment is a huge factor in one of the ways. So we talked about, whether it's a vaginal birth or a C-section, and there's, a lot of thoughts that if child is born via C-section, to do a vaginal swab of the vaginal mucus and apply it to the nasal cavities, the mouth, the ears, just all over the infant, so they get other bacteria. So mothers that are having to have a C-section, there's still other methods to apply that same bacteria to children. Obviously, we talked about the foods we eat. So breast milk being that first one, but other types of foods can cause changes even in the genes microbiome, the genes microbiome associated with vitamin synthesis or even polysaccharide digestion or carbohydrate digestion. That's a factor. So eating more whole foods, those things will feed that, we'll call it the good bacteria, but that part of the microbiome to really, help support that rather than a lot of the highly processed foods that aren't supporting that microbiome. And we're not even going to talk about the lack of nutrients for us, but even for those, the bacteria that are there helping us process. Interaction with the environment, there's a few things here. You could go out and ground. Barefoot, walking on the earth, on grass, is another way to pick up a lot of that. Gardening, growing your own fruits and vegetables. And we were talking about, all the stuff going on with COVID-19, coronavirus. But, grab some small seeds or seedlings and get in there, get some good organic soil and get your hands dirty. On the other flip side of that, and I know this is a sensitive time right now, but all those hand sanitizers that we're using all of the time, and they've shown they're not as good as washing your hands in the prevention, but we're killing off. You remember, we have a microbiome on our skin, and we're constantly, every time we touch something, killing off a lot of the good bacteria that we could be picking up. Social interaction. I know we're staying social distancing right now, and that goes against what we're doing right now, but getting in with other people, again, not right now because we're trying to, social distance, but hugging people or having conversations with people. High fives. High fives are great. We talked about being outside barefoot and growing your own garden and such, but fermented foods, eating fermented foods is another way to get those good bacteria in sauerkraut. And
I love kefir. If you can do fine with milk, oh man, it's so good.
You have that. You also have the kefirs, the kimchi's if you like that. Those are all those fermented foods. You could take a probiotic as well. There are many different types, and depending upon where my clients are, I recommend different ones, whether they're with enteric-coated capsules or non-enteric-coated. So it just depends on where it's going to break down in the body and pass through. There's also a lot of spore-based probiotics, which are really good because that will survive the acidic, treacherous environment in your stomach.
Oh man, I have to stop you because you're saying all kinds of very wonderful, very valuable things that I need to draw attention to. Because don't hear anything else we have to say for a second. Just rewind and listen to all of that one more time and let it really sink in. Because what Bruce just did, without even exhausting the list, he laid out several different ways that you can support a stronger, healthier microbiome for yourself. And I feel like I owe you money right now.
Well, the great thing is a lot of those don't even cost anything. So gardening,
yes.
I mean, if you buy seeds, but if you're already getting bell peppers at the grocery store, you can cut those and use those seeds. Walking on the ground, giving someone a high five or a hug, none of those cost anything.
So true. There's a big paradigm shift for people that needs to happen when we talk about microbiome, because a lot of times when we talk about nutrition specifically, we talk about taking care of our bodies, right? We got to take care of our body. We got to feed our body. We got to fuel our body. We got to make sure it's got what it needs, right? I say that a lot. Like, you can go back through my show and listen to all of it. I talk about my body very often. But when we're talking about the microbiome, what we're talking about is the environment of the other bodies that are also in communion with our own body right now. And that's a big deal. So you said something that was beautiful. Right now, we're all sanitizing the heck out of our hands, right? When you apply an alcohol-based, and there are other versions of hand sanitizer, but when you apply alcohol to your skin, what's happening is, what it's doing is destroying the cellular membranes of the bacteria on your hands. It's also killing the fat soluble wrapping of the virus, which is why we're telling people to do this, right? But what happens is you leave I don't know, it's like if we all landed on the moon right now, it wouldn't be a beautiful environment. But if we landed on the moon right now, nobody's living there. Just bare rock as far as the eye can see and moon dust, right? So we could just have colonies and it would be a beautiful time just populating. That's what you do to your hands. You're wiping away the population of your microbiome on your hands. And then now it's fresh and open to whatever very next thing you touch. And if that's a toilet handle, then that bacteria, whatever was living there, get to, repopulate but if it's your garden soil, then there's a different colony of bacteria. And I'm not saying that after you go sanitize your hands, you need to run out back and dip your hand in some dirt right now. Although I might actually start doing that given this conversation. But that's so important. People I'm not thinking about my body that way, that it's as an environment, my goal is to support the good stuff, the stuff that helps me to live the life that I would like to live, versus supporting the bad stuff or destroying some of the stuff that might be problematic to me. There's a lot worth saying about that, but you said something in there that I also thought was interesting, and that is the effect that the people around us might have on our own microbiome. And there's so many instances of this that it's almost crazy. For instance, in epidemiological studies of obesity, if a child is raised in a home with 2 obese parents, the possibility or the probability that that child will be obese in adulthood is significantly increased compared to a child who's raised in a home with 2 non-obese parents. And I'm not saying that the parents suck at life and they're doing a bunch of things wrong. What I am saying is that one of the ways that might actually proliferate itself among people, and we say this in common parlance, you become who you hang out with. Like, people rub off on you, we say. It's not just people rub off on us. Their bacterial colonies rub off on us. Right? And in a time when we're worried about, contracting a disease that might kill us and our grandparents, that's a scary thing to say, but in positive ways, someday post this pandemic, that's the case. We are literally rubbing off on each other. And it's very powerful. If I have a positive microbiome that's doing good things for me, I want to spread that around. I want to high five as many people as possible, right?
Right.
Now I've said a lot of things, Bruce. I just wanted to point put a spotlight on some of the things you said there. When people are trying to understand their microbiome, many people don't understand the things that would make a difference for them. what about the things that we're doing to destroy our microbiome? So you mentioned the hand sanitizer thing, but there's a lot of foods and stuff that we're putting in our face that might be problematic.
Right.
And a lot of things we're doing in our habits that might be problematic. So what's on your list of things there?
So we can get, this tends to get a little more controversial when we start talking about, the things to try to prevent or stay away from. But
I don't think you're going to hurt anybody's feelings around here. They'll complain to me, not you. Go ahead.
well, so to start with, foods, more highly processed foods they don't feed us as well. They don't feed, the bacteria as well. They don't have the same kind of nutrition density that you would get in your more whole foods. It's not created this way, but jokingly aside, your science lab where your processed foods are is going to be a little bit more sterile than out in nature where your whole foods are. Mm. Again, not necessarily the case, but it just helps that thought pattern, for people.
Well, so if you don't mind, I'd like to give an example. So you mentioned sauerkraut as a fermented, like positive thing for our microbiome, right?
Okay.
Now, some people are going to go to the grocery store and they're going to look for sauerkraut in the canned food aisle and go, hey, I heard Bruce Cooper on Defining Dad Bod say sauerkraut was good for my microbiome. However, it's canned. Do you know what a canned food is? It's been exposed to a high level of heat and it's been sealed in this can. You're not adding any good bacteria to your gut eating canned sauerkraut, right?
For sauerkraut, looking for a live, hopefully organic sauerkraut. But live is important to your point, because when you say live, it's not the cabbage that's live. It's actually the microbiome
that's eating the cabbage. Yeah, you want to be a beneficiary of the process of the cabbage rotting. Sure. Basically, that's what we're getting at. Well, and that's what fermented just means edible things that are
digested
rotting
by the bacteria.
Kind of. Exactly. And so a lot of those fermented food products that people are trying to add to their diet to be positive for them, there are versions of it that are better for you than others. If you can make your own sauerkraut at home or make your own kimchi at home, you're going to have a much more lush group of microbiome supporting bacteria in there than if you're buying your canned sauerkraut it tastes good. It tastes great with bratwursts, but it's not going to be helping your microbiome, right?
Right. Yogurt's another one. I think we have that. There's other things, to look at and avoid. So going down in the world of, with the farmers out there, there's a substance known as glyphosate. Now, where we may have heard it as consumers, that's the active ingredient in something called Roundup. And Roundup it's used as a weed killer. But here's the thing. It was patented as an antibacterial, antifungal, and anti-parasite product. So it was patented more as an antibiotic than it was as a weed killer. Actually, it wasn't patented as a weed killer. And what it does to kill the weeds is it destroys the building blocks of life. So the microbials that help those grow. And the place that it disrupts is called the shikimate pathway. So we don't, as a human, have a shikimate pathway. That is found, it's very unique to bacteria and fungus, and that's where biosynthesis of the aromatic amino acids come from. So a lot of the essential amino acids that we have to get outside because we can't make them, phenylalanines, things like that, tryptophan, tyrosine, which we've heard is important, and you'll hear a lot of that when we speak about thyroid. Those are precursors to some of those things, and we know how prevalent thyroid issues are out there. But those are essential elements that we need, that they're building blocks of dopamine and serotonin. We talked about neurological functions, and those are neurotransmitters we need. So we want to look at not using things that contain glyphosate. So they found, and what happened was so to kill the weed, you just need to basically, so the benefit, gardening, get down on your hands and knees and pull it out by the root, you're going to get some of those benefits that we talked about earlier. Using the Roundup, what ended up happening is you had these guys going out on their weekend with these big canisters just flooding their driveway because, it's not a pavement treatment, but to kill those weeds that grow up between there and in their garden, and all of that glyphosate gets run off into the water, which is why glyphosate, I think they say it's in like 90% of the population around the world now. that they find traces of that, and it comes from this. But they started using glyphosate as a drying agent for wheat because you don't want to pick the wheat while it's alive. They pick it, they dry it out. So they use that, they spray the grains with it, and they do it before the wheat's mature. And so there are some thoughts in that's where the issues with a lot of the gluten intolerance or the protein gliadin that's found in the gluten, that's where a lot of it can come from. Our body doesn't do well. Glyphosate's water soluble. Our body doesn't do well with it. It doesn't like it. It is a toxin. But in the mid 2000s, 2010, 2011, they started doing genetic modifications with soy and corn and sugar beets, where a lot of our sugars come from. So they made it resistant to glyphosate, so they can now saturate those crops in glyphosate to kill the weeds around them and such, but not kill those specific, like the soybeans. So that causes some problems. So when you ask me what to stay away from, genetically modified soy and genetically modified corn, those sugar beets, those are some big ones because then we get that glyphosate in our body.
I need to point out two things you said there that were just really, really important. So one, when we're talking about glyphosate, unfortunately, people can't flip over their food product and read the ingredients and find glyphosate. I mean, I guess that's fortunate. If you were eating glyphosate, like in amounts that we knew about, you probably wouldn't make it very long, right? But that being said, that doesn't mean you're not exposed to it in said food product, right?
Right.
And then the second thing that you said is so important is when we talk about eating non-GMO foods, that's a big, I don't know, what's the word? Crunchy? Is that the word the kids are using these days? It's a very crunchy thing to say. Like I'm an all natural hippie mystic in my commune, and I don't eat GMO foods, right? But it's not like, genetic modification can be pretty powerful. It can make things resistant to drought. It can make things yield more of the fruit you want to eat, right? It could also make your vegetables absorb more water, so they look prettier on the shelf, but there's not really any more nutrients there, right? But all that being said, what Bruce is saying here is that many things that we have genetically modified to lower the cost of production, because it's a lot cheaper to saturate things with glyphosate than it is to actually, go out and remove the weeds, right? Go garden. If you haven't done a garden, do a garden this summer, and then ask yourself over and over and over again, why the hell am I not spraying my stuff down with things that kill weeds? Because it's a lot more work, right? So anyway, all that to say, GMO foods aren't necessarily doing terrible things to your body. There could be an argument to be made there. But one of the things that you can be certain of is that genetically modified soybean, corn, wheat, those things have been genetically modified so that they can resist the problems with regard to some of the chemicals that are being put on them, and therefore will likely be very saturated in said chemical. And that's a problem for your microbiome if you're trying to keep good bacteria around and you're introducing an antibiotic regularly.
Right. And so that's the point. So just to clarify, wheat's not technically genetically modified, and we don't want it. Where their theory wasn't, they didn't want that. They want the glyphosate because it's a drying agent for that, so they can harvest it.
Okay, fair enough. Sorry, I said that. Go ahead.
No, that's okay. That becomes the issue. So if we're ingesting glyphosate, it's those several trillion bacteria that we have that are essential for production of neurotransmitters in our body, for those essential amino acids, those things. Our immune system, is it 80-90% of our neurotransmitters are affected, or 70-80%, 80-90% of our immune system comes from there. That's what ends up getting disrupted, are those bacteria. By adding in things like glyphosate, that is an antibacterial, antifungal, and that starts causing other issues in our body. And they trace it down. I saw a map, and then, going back to part of the greatness of Dr. Zach Bush is the tributaries of the Mississippi River, which goes down the Mississippi River, and they're showing some of the highest areas of cancer in the country, maybe even in the world, between Baton Rouge and New Orleans. Those tributaries, that's where they're spraying a lot of that glyphosate, moving it, through there, so down through the Mississippi. So they're showing overlays of, where cancers are showing, and that there's a lot of correlation there. Again, we're not saying cause and effect. They haven't done those lengthy studies that can show there, but that's where I throw some caution
Well, unfortunately, we won't see those studies. It would be unethical to pump human beings full of glyphosate knowingly
Right.
and then check their microbiome, right? So unfortunately, well, I mean, I'm glad nobody's suffering for that, but we won't see those studies. That's one of the things that people need to know about the evolving science, is that we won't see studies that link very specific trace toxic products in regard to microbiome.
Right. And then when they talk about, there's a protein, ZO1, that helps hold together, it's like a glue protein, helps hold those tight junctions together in our gut. And, the glyphosate is a factor in destroying those and breaking them down. So as you know, we want those tight junctions. So only the things that our body needs to get through from our intestines into the bloodstream will go through there. But when you destroy those tight junctions, it opens up and it allows proteins that shouldn't go through those tight junctions, because they're not allowed when it's a tight junction. Those proteins can go through there, and that starts causing other issues, moving stuff from the gut into blood vessels, and it starts interrupting a lot of the communications between cells. So cellular communication is extremely important. Our cells, they talk to the ones that are around them, and those cells talk to the ones that are around them, and they, it's kind of like, hey, this is the status report, everything's going good here, and hey, this is happening over here, and that's part of the immune system. It'll, hey, this is bad that's going on here, let's send stuff over to identify them and kill the coronavirus. That's what's happening right now, right? But if that gets interrupted, then we don't do well at identifying the things around there, and cells, they're only supposed to live for a certain amount of time before they're replaced. And that's part of where certain things can start becoming precancerous or cancerous even. If that communication's not there, if we're not saying, hey, this cell's outlived its life and now it's growing abnormally. That's what I think physicians define cancer as, right? Those abnormal growing, cells. And so we need that communication, to continue, and that works too. Glyphosate disrupts some of the alkaloids in food. So, we've heard that term food is medicine. But if those alkaloids, that is like the quote unquote medicine that's in the food. And if that's being disrupted, that doesn't work well either. So, we really want to be careful. Those are some ways that in our food supply, overuse of antibiotics is another one of those that can be a detriment to our microbiome. Antibiotics are great where they're warranted. Quite a while where physicians were you come in, you're coughing, you're sneezing, here's an antibiotic and go, but it's flu. Well, we know the antibiotics don't work on viruses like they do on the bacteria. And we know when they work on the bacteria, they work on the good as well as the bad if that antibiotic is going to break down that specific cell wall or what it's looking at.
I want to pause you right there. That's such a good point. In our family, specifically, and I'm going to try not to name any names and throw anybody under the bus. But in our family, so you've got me, you've got my registered dietitian wife, and you've got our 2 kids, right? And then we've also got extended family, grandparents and aunts and uncles and stuff. And we'll hear that somebody's had this thing they couldn't kick, and so they went and they got antibiotics and a Z-Pack or whatever, and then 3 months later they still haven't kicked it, so they're going to do it again, right? And so we have almost like a running list on our minds of the poor family members who have wiped out their microbiome a few different times, because in our family, that's a time clock. It starts a clock. Like I had some dental work done and I had to take an antibiotic ahead of time in order to prevent, infection from setting in, and then, thereafter, right? And for me, that's the timer. Click, boom. I have wiped out a very happy microbiome, and now I've got a couple weeks to rebuild it. And so I'm going to incorporate X, Y, and Z, and I'm going to, bring that back. I need to make sure and limit certain foods that would project me in a bad direction. Like in my home, between me and my wife, that's code red situation. Alex is on a very special diet because of this at the moment, right? But most people I talk to don't think that way. They're like, oh yeah, I was on this antibiotic. I'm like, what'd you do about that? Oh, I mean, I got better. So that was good. Like, wait, hold up. There's a bunch of other things we should probably do to make the best for you right now. Anyway, so that being said, if you're listening to us right now and you've taken an antibiotic for a great reason, or even for a bad reason, I don't care, then this is a great time for you to be repopulating yourself with good stuff. That's important.
Yeah, well, and so back to the antibiotics. So a course of antibiotics increases, chances of anxiety and depression over the next year. 2 courses increases it. I think it's almost like 54% they've shown of having an episode of anxiety or depression, in that next year. But we tend to want to prescribe something else, for that instead of looking at what are the effects on the microbiome and how is that impacted from high antibiotic use. Again, antibiotics are great when they're warranted, but overprescribing. And then we look at other places that they're suspecting antibiotics coming in from, and they're looking at those the big feeding organizations where they have 100 cows in a room, probably as big as my office here, right? And so they're giving them antibiotics so they don't want to spread the disease, but then those are down in our food layer, and they're starting to say, well, maybe it wasn't necessarily the overprescribing of the antibiotics that has caused a lot of the antibiotic resistant organisms that are out there, but a lot of it may be coming from what they're doing in the food industry. So, I mean, there's a lot of thoughts behind all of that. I think the one thing we know is the overuse of antibiotics is probably not a good thing. So wherever you want to put your pin in and say, this is where my stance is, that's fantastic. It's just, we know antibiotics, they're going to kill the bad bacteria, but they're also going to take care of some of the good ones. So we have to repopulate after that as well.
Right. Very well said. Now, brother, we've said a lot of things in the last hour. So if I'm listening to this and this is the first time I've even considered taking good care of my microbiome, my head's probably spinning at the moment. So I want to encourage the listeners, if you're concerned about taking good care of your microbiome, meaning that you want to foster an environment that's going to benefit, we keep saying the good bacteria. Unfortunately, there's only a few on that list. We don't really know. Like not just Bruce Cooper and I, but science at large. We're just starting to figure out what a quote good bacteria is compared to bad bacterias. For the long term. Now we know the ones that cause strep throat and make you get your tonsils taken out and all that fun stuff. But we're just starting to learn this stuff. And so what I would like to leave the listeners with, if you're starting at ground zero, Bruce, because I know you work with a lot of people and I know you help people get their microbiome moving in a good direction for them, less depression, less anxiety, less inflammatory bowel disease, like better insulin resistance, all of those things. Where should somebody start? And then at what point should they loop a professional in like yourself to help them continue that journey in a good direction?
So I would always encourage somebody to seek out, a professional, somebody that's doing that, because everybody's cases can be a little bit, a little different, and like we spoke about, anxiety or depression, some neurological things can stem from, a disrupted microbiome. Type 2 diabetes can stem from, obesity can have some. But the other thing to know is all of these things we're talking about, they are multifactorial. So there are other influences, not necessarily just the microbiome, though that could be a big piece of it. But then a professional, myself, yourself, your wife, can help identify some of those factors that are negatively influencing. Like you brought up the point with the sauerkraut. A lot of people may not know that. They hear sauerkraut and they go get their can of Heinz sauerkraut, and that's not containing enough of the probiotic to really make that much of a difference. So having professional guidance to show where things should be eliminated and things to be added are always great. If you don't have that resource, just starting with some simple things like grounding. So taking your shoes and socks off and go standing in the dirt, in the grass, and walking around. Play with your kids. If you have kids, when we had our son, I called him in the first several years of life our human petri dish, because when they go to daycare or whatever they do, they're on the floor, they're crawling around, they're putting their hands in their mouth, their feet in their mouth, they're full of stuff. Play with your kids. Go out, go to the park. I think I've seen pictures of you with your boys running around and doing stuff. Throw a football, throw the baseball. You're going to get some of that on your hands. Don't be afraid try not to be a germaphobe. You know, I mean, obviously there are severe mental disorders that go down those phobias, but you know, the self-proclaimed, you know, germaphobe, those germs are things that can help us. I know we're in a different time again. I keep saying that, you know, this month, last month, and maybe even the coming month, but you know, you don't need, you know, every time you touch something, you grab the Purell out and sterilize your hands so that you're going to get other things, because they are going to help. The ones that are there are going to help fight off the other ones. Garden, it's great if you can go out and pick a bell pepper right off your pepper plant outside and put it in your salad, or even saute it up and eat it. It's so delicious just having that pick there. And then you get to garden and you get to get that as well. So, you know, if you have the means to seek out professional guidance, I strongly recommend that, because they can help go through some of the multifactorial things that are there. If you don't, and you just really want to support your microbiome, get out and play, get out and garden, eat fermented foods, you know, add that to your list. And you'll see it'll say live probiotic, you know, on the jar of sauerkraut. So those are some great things.
Man, well said. We could talk about this for a long time, obviously. I feel like you did a masterful job fitting in a very large amount of value into a conversation. I just want to say thank you, because this is not something that many people are talking about right now in the world that know what they're talking about. Because you can Google microbiome and you can read all kinds of very quacky things, but what you're saying here and how you've presented it is extremely helpful. So I appreciate that. I'm going to put your links so that people can get connected with you below and stuff. But if somebody does want professional help with this, from a gut perspective, from a depression and anxiety perspective, and they're looking at improving their microbiome, what steps would you guys go through together? They reach out, you probably do a consultation, and then what does that look like?
I do a consultation, usually about an hour and a half, 2 hours, whether it's in person or virtual. Really talk about them and their history, where they've gone. Love to hear about, you know, antibiotic use, and like we talked about, that those are definitely in there, especially if it's been long term or several instances. What's their fitness level? What's their nutrition like? It's like an 8 or 9 page intake form. They would download and send to me prior to their appointment, so I can go through it and wrap my head around. And then, you know, we sit down and have that conversation. I let my clients know that this is not hey, Bruce said to do this and you must do this. This is, it's both of us making this plan. And, you know, my clients definitely have input. If there are things that I feel strongly about, then I will let them know. And this is a direction we want to go, but, you know, they don't need to bite off more than they can chew. There is definitely a psychology aspect to making changes, as you well know, and bad habits are hard to break. Good habits are not easy to get in place. And we like to work on that. And it really depends on the client, the frequency I would see them, you know, after. I do have weekly clients. I have people I see once every 6 months, or they call me when something's happened. Hey, cold and flu season's coming up. What are some things? Help me wrap my head around those things that you talk about to help boost the immune system. You know, how to eat it, different supplements they may want to take, exercise, those types of things. So I work as a traditional naturopath. I work as a nutritionist, and I do some stuff as, you know, still as a personal trainer. So I try to incorporate that into more of a holistic approach.
The world needs more Bruce Coopers. That's all I'm saying. There's only one, though.
Thank you.
There's only one.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Now, we're not going to be able to pass microbiomes off to each other, but I'd like to high five you, at least virtually. Boom. Yeah, thanks for that. And I appreciate this conversation, brother. I think there's a lot more that can be said about it, and I'm looking forward to, as research comes out, you have our commitment that we will ping each other and come back on the show and talk about some of the weird things, unless you just don't want to hear about, you know, breastfeeding for an entire show or something like that. But I'm just letting the listeners know that we've got it going on. Guys, stay safe in your homes, wash your hands, and then go grab some dirt. And until next time, kick butt and take names. 1, 2, 3, 4. The free, practical advice and conversations here remain unbought and unbiased, thanks to the support of listeners just like you. If this episode's been helpful to you, please share it with somebody in your life who you know it will benefit. Then, subscribe to the podcast and leave us a raving review to tell others what value Defining Dad Bod has brought to your health and fitness journey. And finally, if you want more Defining Dad Bod, consider joining our online community. We send a lot of free perks and resources your way, and I, Coach Alex, go live every month to talk through our listeners' health and fitness questions to make the practical science of this show applicable to everyday life. Everyone's welcome, and we'd love to have you. For more information about joining the Inner Circle or becoming a supporter of the Defining Dad Bod podcast, go to definingdadbod.com/inner circle. That's definingdadbod.com/inner circle.